All right. Well, hello and welcome to interview number 7. Today we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic that I always find fascinating when I meet new people, which is how do people actually get into the accessibility space, or how does that conversation first unfold for people? So today we are actually joined by one of my good friends and accessibility business partners in crime. We've been working together for almost 5 years at this point. And neither of us, when we met, we're working in accessibility. We both have kind of over the course of the years gone through our own journey to get into this space. And so I'm super interested to unpack this conversation and share it to hopefully hear how other people have got into the accessibility space themselves. So RJ, thank you for joining. Why don't you start out by doing a quick introduction?
Well, I want to say not only were we both not in the accessibility space 5 years ago when we met, I don't think either of us knew that it existed 5 years ago. But my name is RJ Holliday. I'm born and raised here in Canton, Ohio. I graduated from Jackson High School and then went to the University of Akron, in which I graduated with a bachelor's in exercise science sport management. Post that, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my degree. I worked out in the gym. I was like, oh, maybe I could be a personal trainer. Maybe I could open a gym. I could go work for a sports team. I could do all this other stuff. And ultimately, kind of landed on that. I had a couple people in my life that were physician's assistants or PAs, and that is a medical career path that you can basically take any bachelor's degree that you have into. Plus or minus a few specific classes here and there that you got to take to be able to get into a program. But I really found a calling at that time that I thought that I could do the schooling. I could go back to school, finish the PA program, and really use my skill set and I guess my God-given talent of empathy and understanding to go back and work with kids with disabilities. So probably would be a PA underneath a psychiatrist or a psychologist, work with like early childhood development and stuff like that. Ultimately, in that time, I met another individual who is directly intrinsically tied to everything that James and I do since about 5-6 years ago, named Jan. And we started the company that I'm a co-founder of right now. So that started off as a podcast and just kind of skyrocketed to the point where I was like, I guess I don't need to go back to school right now, because I have, I'm meeting people, I'm networking, I'm doing things that I never thought that I would be able to do in the past. And it's actually turning into business for us. And by the grace of God, we through that process, we're able to find James. And so if any of that if none of that ever happened, me and him would not be sitting at our computers doing this interview right now. We brought James on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but 100% only for marketing and web dev stuff.
Exactly. Yep.
So
I was the technical guy behind the scenes.
Yeah. So James came on, we started having people like, hey, like, we liked your guys' website. We like the followership that you guys garnered on your podcast. How do we market ourselves? How do we build a website? How do we get ourselves out there so we can get more notoriety? And we kind of sat there and we're like, we spend hundreds, if not thousands of hours figuring out how to do this on our own. Maybe we should just start consulting on this stuff. So we brought James in to be a big part of that. And I think within a year, he had a meeting on his own and was just like, hey, I'm starting to dig a little bit deeper into this digital accessibility stuff. One of our potential clients had talked to us about, do you guys care? Like, if I kind of dig myself a massive hole here and really dive into what this is, because it directly affects me. And I kind of feel like it was a calling in the middle of the night that he was just like, I think I need to go for this. And we sat there and we're like, hey, brother, as long as it doesn't affect building websites or looking at other stuff, and you like take all the time that you need. Shit. Then James comes back 6 months later. He's like, I got this cool certification and I'm meeting with people from Verizon and General Electric. And we're all like, whoa, wait, what's happening here? And like I'll say, like, right off the bat, I didn't fully invest myself in, what James was doing, and had a really big understanding until he asked me, like, I think it was like a string of a month where you had a ton of meetings locally to talk to people, and you're like, hey, I just need a ride to get there. Like, can you take me? And I was like, yeah, sure, of course. Like, most of my work's done at home. If I get the opportunity to go out and see what's going on, sure, I'll take it. So we went to a couple of those. Just the way James talked and the way that clients were responded, and how many people it really can affect, and how, as we see now, how little effort on the accessibility specialist side can make things so much better for a large group of people without like a ton of effort or money to really make an impact and make a difference for these people. That same part of my brain after graduating from Akron that said maybe you should go back to the University of Mount Union and possibly go through PA school, that trigger in my brain was like, I think this is something in which I can do good for other people, and not just monetarily good, but like life fulfilling goodness for, people who really need it, who want to live equal lives to the people that surround them on a daily basis, and maybe have never had the faculties or opportunity to be able to do that. So I said, shit, James, run me through the course. I said, put me through all the stuff that you went through. Let me experience it. I don't want to be just the guy that kind of looks like your dad in the background that was dropping you off at business meetings. So I was just like, yeah, bring me up to speed.
Yeah.
So I got the literal crash course of James's programs that he's put together, went through, got my CPAC certification. And then since then, it's kind of been history. James and I have been tackling projects together, kind of hand in hand, for a while now. He has his approach to it. I cover the other half of it, and we're able to knock things out pretty quick. But going and talking to the people that we've talked to, like the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and some of the projects on bigger companies and even smaller companies, it's such an interesting field to now be a part of, and be like, not only are there people who are being forced to be compliant, but there's so many people who want to be compliant because it's the right thing to do. So you see so many varying different people. And I think one of the things that I like most about working with James and the things that we're doing is, a lot of the time, the most satisfaction, or at least impact, that I see that I'm making on people is when we just talk about the things that we do to a web page or a document or anything like that. And then you have people that you run into a month later that are like, I can't look at a website the same. Like, now that all you did was talk to me for a half hour about how I can't use a keyboard. Now I'm at home on my laptop trying to tab through, and I'm like, this is terrible. They're like, I know nothing about this, but I know what you told me, and now all my websites, I'm like, this is bad. So it's been real fulfilling work. And I'm excited to do even more and more as, stuff ramps up between James and I, and people. We're at the point now where people are knocking on our door. We're not exactly knocking on everybody else's door for help, and that's nice to see. And I think in the long run, the more we stick at this, the more people that we train, the more professionals that we get out in the market, just overall, the better things are going to be for a lot of people. More people than, if they were sat in front of you, more people than you could ever imagine in your head that this stuff affects.
Yeah. And so that's why I wanted us to have this conversation, because both of us took kind of an unconventional, we just ended up in accessibility, as some people would say. And so for me, when I talk to people, a lot of people assume, like, since I have a visual impairment or a visual disability, this is what I went to school to do, or I've been doing this since I was diagnosed at 9 years old. And I went to school for marketing. I started out as a search engine optimization specialist. I found myself in a conversation. So yeah, I have the 17, 18 years of lived experience, but I had to go through an almost 2-year learning process myself to be confident and comfortable enough talking about this, as somebody with a disability, being brought up through the public education system, going through college and finding my first job. I was never really empowered, if that's the right word, to own my disability and for it to be a part of my personality. It was more of the, unless they ask about it, don't talk about it. It really wasn't ever pitched to me that my disability wasn't anything other than a disadvantage. And going through this journey over the last couple of years, that is really what I've sort of focused on with myself, is taking what most people assume as a disadvantage, or a negative factor or things like that, and turning it into something that I can leverage in my work. And I'm now a workaholic, and everything I do is accessibility. And to some people, I'm sure that gets tired hearing me rant on and on about it. But to me, it doesn't feel like work, because it's just a part of who I am as an individual. And so when I meet new people, this conversation is always super fascinating to me. When I meet people, I always ask them, how did you get into accessibility? Or what was your like transition experience like? What was your learning process like? And most people have a direct experience or a direct factor that sort of started things for them, whether it was themselves going through a temporary or a permanent disability, it was their spouse or their brother or their sister, or a family member, a close friend. There's usually that like one-to-one connection. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily the entire story when it comes to you, RJ, because of where you were before we even met and wanting to work with kids and things like that. So I think your sort of perspective is very interesting, and there aren't a whole lot of people that share it, that don't have that one-to-one connection. You always say that you're colorblind, and you don't consider it to be a technical disability. Because it
not when I'm standing next to you. That's not fair. That's not fair to put me there.
But it's so fascinating to me, like all of the different walks of life coming together to have this conversation. And we've met with teachers and instructional designers, CEOs and COOs. We've met with small local businesses, parents, and anything in between that you can think of. And so, when you talk about your sort of process of learning underneath of me, and going through that with your pre-existing early childhood development sort of intentions, what part of this whole accessibility conversation was it that really caught your attention and made you want to go through the crash course?
So I really think it's just so I have two, I consider them like, well, one of them's my godchild, and another named Mason, and another one, his younger brother, Maddox, who's my sister's godchild. And I have some other cousins that are in between there, like one's in high school, and another one is probably going to be in high school next year. I think she's in 8th grade and whatever, but they're like the youngest cousins that my family is closest to. And I remember seeing all this stuff through COVID about just like, look at all of this digital learning. Kids don't have to go to, like, it's mandatory to go to school like once a week, and you can opt out of the other 4 days a week to work from home. Nobody gets books anymore. Everybody has tablets. Everything's done online. And I remember going to Jackson because I think we had a pretty good program for children with disabilities. I mean, I know personally, Jackson did no favors for you, James. But when I was older and in high school, I remember there being quite a big program. And funny enough, my oldest aunt, my godmother, is actually the grandma of me and my sister's godchildren. She worked at Jackson for almost 35 years with all their special needs kids. So she was directly tied to them, I think the one kid, Bobby, he took such a liking to her or attached to her that she went middle school through high school with him as like a one-to-one attendant through school and all that stuff. And I always found her job very admirable, because there would be times where she would just be extremely over the moon about Bobby's progress. And then there would be days where she would just break down and cry because, there's just such large swings in temperament and ability from day to day and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, wow. And I go, imagine that being all on a parent at home with technology that is difficult and not able to be used correctly because it's not designed correctly. And I think in the back of my mind, that was a big thing where it was just like, even in just school systems, the idea of I was not bad at school, but did I apply myself super duper well all the time? No. Could I imagine if I had to be home and self-proctored by myself or my parents to do all my schoolwork and stuff like that? And then God forbid if the stuff doesn't work to my capabilities. So that was with just how much younger kids nowadays are just all consumed by phones and tablets and laptops and what are they not LeapPad, Chromebooks, which is what most schools get now in replacement of books and stuff like that. I think it's so important to make that stuff accessible and easy to use. And but I made the conscious decision to jump in and do this stuff with James before really knowing the depth of it, but at a base level, not really knowing and just thinking we're making things easier to use for all people in all walks of life. And then I got more depth into it. My initial motivator was, within that thought process.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard that side of the story with your aunt and sort of
never asked. You never asked, buddy.
Up to her. But it so kind of taking that conversation in a little bit different of a direction of now we're here. Now we're 3-4 years into this. We've worked on hundreds of projects, small and large. When it comes to like the day-to-day of the accessibility testing, and you mentioned it, that it could be something as simple as tabbing through a website with a keyboard. What are some of those things that you've sort of taken accustomed to that you emphasize to share with people that do make other people's lives easier or possible in some cases?
You mean like specific criteria, like the keyboard stuff?
Just specific features or user experience things that you've come across consistently that you've had to tell other people about?
Oh, a lot of the time, I mean, I still get like you'd be hard pressed. Like, it's not just people with visual disabilities that Zoom. I mean, there's all those jokes about what is it called, the jitterbug phone for older people, where the icons are like 7 times normal size or whatever. Like the Zoom feature, whether it's to 200%, 400%, 7,000% or whatever, like that's something that so many people use. As I'm getting older, I'm zooming in more. Some people make their websites so small, and then it's even more frustrating that when the website isn't optimized to be able to be zoomed, shit's just flying all over the page. You have what you're looking for disappears. It gets wrapped behind other stuff. That's a big one that I know that I talk to a lot of people that are like, there's so many people who use a Zoom function on your phone or on your computer. Make sure your website reflows properly and things are in the right place, and you're not making it more difficult when all they're trying to do is make the text a little bit bigger. Yeah. I would say another big one that we run into all the time is the color contrast, which directly affects me and being colorblind a little bit. But even for low vision people, it's real simple things like, yeah, we understand like these colors and stuff on your website look sick as hell. Like, yes, everything looks great, but you putting yellow text on an orange background is doing nobody favors. Absolutely. Nobody likes it, regardless of any type of disability. Everybody's squinting at their screen, turning their brightness up, trying to see what's going on. Yeah, it might look cool, but it's not. It hurts so many people in the long run. And it's even less glaring issues in that regard. Like, don't put light blue buttons on white backgrounds where at a glance, if somebody was colorblind or is low vision, that might just come across as, plain text with a little stylization difference. Not so much a whole button that they should be clicking on or be worrying about it on their page. So I would say color contrast is another big one that we run into a lot of the time. And then back to the keyboard thing, I think that's probably the third, if not one of the most consistent ones, or at least one of the most consistent ones that anybody we can talk to is able to just immediately go back to a computer or a laptop or something like that and test themselves. Like color contrast is one thing because you usually have to use an app unless you somehow have all the hex codes memorized in your brain and you know you can do percentages real quick in your head on what the ratio contrast ratio is on stuff.
Yeah.
But that takes a little bit of work. The Zoom stuff
depends how if you know how to do it or not.
Yeah, depends. But the keyboard and focus and keyboard usability stuff is something that someone can go back and say, okay, hey, I've clicked on the search bar like he said, and I'm just going to hit tab. And then a lot of the times people are like, there's just nothing there. I don't know where I am on the page. I can see in the bottom left-hand corner that it says I'm somewhere, but I don't know where I'm at.
Yeah.
Or it just doesn't work at all, or it skips around the page and it's super confusing. And then that instantly makes a connection in those people's brains. And they're like, holy shit, if I had to do this and I legitimately couldn't use my eyes, I would be so boned.
Or a mouse, just a mouse in general. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if I couldn't use the mouse and I had to use the keyboard, I
wouldn't be great.
No, they're like, it'd be impossible. How do people do it? Be like, people do it because we're able to facilitate the systems that they're comfortable using with the way that we design stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that one really hits home. The other one that you kind of got to facilitate, the last one I'll bring up is the screen readers. I think you put those on full bore, 200 speed or whatever, and people hear how people ingest elements on a website through a screen reader, their heads just explode. They're like, that sounds like a blender going off, and they know exactly where they're on the page, and they read the image to them, and now they're navigating in this thing. Oh no, you're like, yeah, that also
you've seen that firsthand with
a lot of times.
Companies that we go sit down with, because one of the things I think that sets us apart is like, we're not just going to do the testing and tell you everything that's wrong or broken. We're going to sit down with you, and show you and talk through the solutions with you so that you are on the same page with us. One of the things early on for me when I was having those meetings with Verizon and other large scale companies that have been working on accessibility for a decade, education was everything. And getting people to be aware is one thing, but educating and informing them is another thing. And so when we go meet with a college or a university or a local park or whatever that might look like, one of the things is we will sit down and turn the screen reader on and go through their website with them so that they can get an understanding for what that experience might be like. Now, it's very hard to do in some cases for people that want to look at the screen but also hear the screen. That's not going to be the same experience as somebody who is not able to look at the screen. And we've actually, in one of our events that we did, figured out a way around that with the blindfolds and taking away everybody's sense of vision so they can't just look at the screen and their brain filling the gaps between what they're hearing and what they're seeing. And so I think it's important in that context to talk about all of the different levels to the experience. You have your beginner users, your intermediate, your advanced users who know all the keyboard shortcuts. But at the end of the day, if you can design it for a beginner, the advanced people are going to have no problems either. And to me, that's the most important part of being able to sit down with clients or potential clients or community partners or nonprofits and show them firsthand so that they know how to tab through a website. Most people know that the tab key is there, but they don't ever use it. The common, we're used to the space bar, the enter key, the arrow keys, the escape key, things like that. But it's a whole nother world when you turn a screen reader on and now every letter key and number key on your keyboard is a shortcut. And so we try to minimize that sort of overwhelming initial conversation by incrementally introducing things of just navigate with a keyboard. Okay, you're feeling good with that. Let's turn the screen reader on and do the same thing, navigating with the tab key. But now let's hear what it's picking up and putting out. Is that actually a button, or is that actually a link that you're referring in your instructions to as a button when it's actually a link that takes you to an external destination? So it's been super fun to kind of go back and forth, and having two of us in the room coming from two completely different walks of life, two different sets of lived and learned experience, to be able to relate and connect with the audience that we're presenting to, or the handful of teachers that are tuning in because they're curious and they want to better serve their students. I think if it was just me in there, people tend to fall in the assumption of like, oh, James has a visual impairment. He's only worried about students with visual disabilities, whether that's blind, low vision, colorblind, whatever on that sort of spectrum of visual impairments. But you and I have spent the last 3 years continuing to learn and explore all of the different types of disabilities, not from the lived experience because we don't live with them, but from the learned experience, and what their interaction preferences and personalizations and settings and configurations might look like, so that we could do our best to replicate them and tailor the experience so it is as close to, if not exactly the same as everybody else's. And that's really, at the end of the day, what accessibility comes down to is like, regardless of whether I'm using the screen reader, I'm zooming into 400%, I have high contrast mode, I'm using a braille display, it's creating as close to, if not exactly the same experience for everybody. And you and I both know this, and people jump to the I'm not accessible, I want to be fully accessible.
Easier said than done.
And then we kind of have to, that's where the sort of exploration and the curiosity and the learning really starts, is because there's so much variability when it comes to technology, when it comes to disabilities, when it comes to all of these different things coming together to create that experience, that there are certain circumstances and scenarios where accessibility reaches its ceiling. Now, most companies will never reach their ceiling. It's an ongoing process. You don't just do accessibility over the summertime and then, well, next time we build our website, we'll take a look at it again. You constantly have to bake it into your process. It's a journey, not a point on the development process, which we talked about at the UX Akron conference back in October. This is something you have to keep working at and keep doing, because just like you work on customer experience and user experience, the accessible user experience is equally as important. And so my last question for you before we kind of wrap this conversation up is, moving forward, you and I are doing a lot of things. We're working with government now. We're working with those small to medium-sized businesses. We have Fortune 500s. When it comes to the barrier of entry, getting into the accessibility conversation, traditionally it's viewed as pretty high, pretty expensive. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. And so I just want to hear your take or your response to somebody that has that initial assumption that accessibility is not for them right now because they don't have dedicated budget or manpower or labor hours set aside for it.
So I think the big thing that we can do, or a rebuttal to that kind of stuff, is because it's something that is consistently being worked on, like you just hinted at. It's not something that you do one time, you set it away until you develop new content and then double back around and test again, and that kind of stuff. We've always been on the side of educate, level up your team, allow them the faculties to be able to look at that stuff on a treadmill as things are being produced, and make and edit those things as they come out. That barrier entry really should be just start somewhere, whether it's just a singular audit so that you have it, or it's a lunch and learn with us, or someone who does stuff like this, or going out to a seminar that we put on or other people put on, or just starting to educate you and your team, if there is a team, to what those, systems and why we choose to hit on the things that we do in our specific development choices. We're not saying you got to spend $70,000 to get your 300-page website audited now immediately. Our hopes are that if you are starting this stuff and start implementing this stuff and get some of this basic stuff or basic people in place, that you avoid a situation where you're getting a lawsuit where you have to pay $70,000 at one time to get things fixed. Because that hurts a lot more than being like, well, shit, if I had started this 2 years ago and, got an accessibility statement up on my page, or started working towards, or had a dedicated line to reach out to for my company that's not just a normal help desk, but it's a help desk for people with disabilities or who need extra help and stuff like that. My rebuttal is to, this is too expensive or too time consuming, is that there are so many little things that are you and I and people within the industry would consider working towards total accessibility, that you can start now, that doesn't cost you an arm and a leg or a significant amount of time to put in to get that process started. Because what I'll tell you right now is, as soon as you start on one of those, you're going to be like, oh shit, we should probably have been doing this 5 years ago. And you're going to find time and money to get it done until someone else finds your time and money to make you pay it.
Yeah. And we've worked with coffee shops and parks and done those little things, from getting braille and accessible versions of the menu in place to getting rid of the 3 different learn more buttons that are side by side on the home with no context to them. Like it is that easy at the end of the day. And if you are listening to this and you want to start your accessibility conversation or begin that journey, RJ and myself have never said no to a conversation. So feel free to look either one of us up on LinkedIn or reach out to us via email. I'll include that down below. But I'm also going to include a link to a weekly newsletter that I read every Friday morning when I'm getting my day started, called Accessibility in the News. Now, this is it comes with a ton of information, but if you want to see what the accessibility conversation looks like in your community, around the country, around the world, if you want to see some of those seminars and webinars that are coming up, jobs that are open within the accessibility space, this newsletter is a fantastic place to start. I've been reading it weekly for like the last year and a half. And I tell all of my students, everyone that I train, to get subscribed to it, because it's a great way to just explore what is happening out there. Everything from making marathon events accessible to public transportation in New York City. There's all kinds of things happening all around us all the time. And it makes it that much easier to jump in the conversation when you have things to talk about. So I'll include a link down to that in the description as well. But I'm going to stop us here, RJ. You and I can talk about this all day long. And we will. You'll if you look us up, you'll see that we've been having this conversation on social media. We're constantly going and being a part of events, whether we're up on stage or in the audience. RJ and I are constantly out and about. So don't hesitate to send us an invite to your next event, to include us, or to come up and say hi when you see us at an event. We're pretty easy to talk to, so don't be shy. But with that, RJ, thank you so much for jumping on and having a conversation. I think this is an important one. And how do you get into this space? Everybody wants.
For everybody.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you. And if you do have any questions, you know where to find us. Until the next one, see you later.
Thanks, everybody.